Okay, I'm going to quickly show some work. I often leave people disappointing by not showing enough of it, but I'm going to do it fairly quickly at the beginning here. And I've got a question I want to return to. There's been a lot of questions so far as I could tell. I'll get back to that in a second. My name is Paul Sahre. I'm a graphic designer from New York City. And I guess some people consider me an illustrator, graphic artist, and now author. But I'm essentially a graphic designer. That's my worldview. So that's sort of the direction I'm coming from. For years, I've operated a small, super small office in Manhattan on 6th Avenue and 14th Street. I call my office Office of Paul Sahre, or OOPS. We were open 24 hours. So, you know, I've always, over the years, I've probably been a graphic designer for maybe going on 30 years now. But I've always sort of gravitated to keeping my operations small. So, not this, more like this. That's Bigfoot. You have Bigfoot in India? You have foosball players in India. I found out the hard way out there. They're probably out there still playing. Good for them. I'm essentially a sole practitioner. Although I do have an employee, Matthew Roeder, who's here today. I've always kept it fairly small, just because I like making things. And the more people were involved in the operation, the less I was able to do that. So I think that keeping it small, I tend to work on smaller projects, I would say. And I sort of stumbled into designing book covers. And as I said, I'm going to click through these fairly quickly. I love designing book covers. I consider it a really, it's such a clear sort of design problem. You know, and I would admit to not being that interested in the marketing or the selling of books, although covers are used in that context, and quite often I'm having to deal with that. But I really look at a book cover as a doorway to an experience somebody's having. You know, you look at a cover before you start reading, essentially. And I think in that way, it's just endlessly interesting. Reading becomes part of my job, and I try to read every book that I'm designing a cover for. I've gotten exposed to all kinds of amazing things through designing book covers. Now it's been years ago, but we redesigned all of Ernest Hemingway's covers. And mostly right now I'm designing covers for a small, venerable New York publisher called New Directions. They do a lot of non-English translations. And so the books are always interesting. And I've learned the hard way that, you know, again, I'm reading the book. I want it to be interesting. You know, it has to be interesting. You can't separate those two things. So these are some of the covers that I've been doing for New Directions. And I've been doing a lot of covers for the great Brazilian author Clarice Lispector. And this was a situation where I was actually asked to design 4 covers at the same time. So it gave me the opportunity to sort of not think book specific about the cover. And I used the author's, an image of the author on each of the 4 books. And as I just said, I'm not that interested in the selling of books, but there's not too many people who left bookstores with one of these. You know, they always bought 4. These are 2 new covers I've done for the same author. And this is maybe an aside, but you know, even something as simple as this, there's always an internal logic that is in everything that I do. This is a pretty crazy grid, but you wouldn't necessarily notice that or pay attention to it when you're looking at the final cover. But it's always in there. And that comes from design school, certainly. Book covers led me to designing books, and I'm just showing one example here, but I've done many books over the years. This was for Malcolm Gladwell, and it was a sort of a permanent edition of his first 3 books. And these books are, many of you probably read one of these books, Outliers, Tipping Point, and Yeah, blink. Thank you. But they're usually, paperback. You read at the airport and then you maybe even toss it. So this was sort of thinking about it in an opposite way. So I worked with the artist Brian Ray, who's in LA, and he did the drawing. So they're illustrated. They're an illustrated edition. And we concentrated on, material and, foil stamping and trying to think of these things as more permanent. That's a title page. Another thing that I do a lot of is illustration, although real illustrators might argue that I'm not really an illustrator. I certainly approach these projects like a graphic designer does. And I would probably describe my approach as any graphic means necessary to get at some essential aspect or quality about the situation I find myself in as a designer. And these, initially I was doing the only place I was doing any illustration was the op-ed page of the New York Times. And these are all examples of this. So it's basically a situation where it's an image that relates to an editorial or a letter to the editor. And the situation's always changing. Shrinking banks, tax cuts, boring books, right? Often the budgets are super small. I might even have an hour to do these things. And that's sort of how my illustration career started. And the budgets have increased. This is for the New York Times Magazine, and it accompanied an article on scientists genetically developing a less allergic peanut. And I'm on the computer a lot, but I also like building things. And so this is actually made with peanuts and hot glue and wire or whatever. And that's a theme that's kind of repeated in the things that I do. This was a poster for public bikes in San Francisco, sort of, flipping the relationship between car and bike. A cover for the New York Times Magazine on the birth of Twitter. And this it kind of ran with this idea of it being sort of hell. And the birds and the war thing. And so there were a bunch of spots. And I don't know if it's my proximity to the Times, but I certainly feel like with any of my work as a graphic designer and an illustrator, I need to bring my own opinions into the work that I'm making. It can't simply be, an opinion of something can't be client-driven. And so, our current, let's call it an administration, it's just endless opportunities. So this is Kellyanne Conway as Joseph Goebbels. She's Trump's former press secretary, and she always looks stoned to me, which she probably is. In the middle is Scott Pruitt, our former Environmental Protection Agency chief, as a pollution monster. And this guy, this knucklehead, Savino, you can't make this stuff up. He was Trump's golf caddy for years. Now he's the internet czar. And he's the guy who hits send on all of Trump's tweets. Oh God, I've forgotten the painter. I was asked recently I've sort of avoided doing stuff with Trump for various reasons, just because I can't stand his face. But just this past 4th of July, Independence Day for us Americans, took this classic signing of the Declaration of Independence and did something that I posted this on Instagram, and somebody said, yeah, but I think he'll like it. And I'm like, of course he'll like it. Why wouldn't he like that? It's terrifying. Quickly, a little bit, my process in terms of doing illustration. I like to start with ideas and terrible sketches. And, I think this theme has come up with a number of different people of, letting bad ideas out into the world and seeing what happens. You have to sort of be naive, I think, when you do this, anything creative. And these sketches are a perfect example of this. I mean, these are bad ideas, badly drawn. In fact, I think this might be the worst drawing of Albert Einstein in the history of the world. This idea was rejected, by the way, and I can't remember what it was for now. And that's an example of how the sketch can eventually turn into something on the cover of New York Magazine. And you know, it's like I'm going to talk about the whys of being a graphic designer. And I just have to say that one of my favorite things about doing illustration is the ridiculous conversations you have with art directors. I mean, literally at some point, one of the art directors I was working with asked me in the process of making this if I could make them look like they were more into it. There's no romance. I can do that. And I do all kinds of other things. I include this because it's fairly recent and is very different from some of the other work I'm showing you. The poster for the Wall Street Journal, and I was asked, they did a festival called The Future of Everything. And they commissioned 63 other designers to do a future of something. So I was given the future of something randomly, and I was given the future of art. And I immediately emailed back the art director and said, can I have anything else? Anything? I'll take the future of garbage. And he said, no, come on. He gave me a pep talk. You can do this. Like, yes, he's right. I can do it. So anyway, I did a sort of ridiculous take on it. Nobody knows the future, especially me. So this has a whole bunch of ridiculous art movements of the future. Gorp art, new media. I came up with a whole bunch of future colors called Yor and Plix and Fru and Glui. And there's me with one of those ridiculous virtual reality helmets. We're all going to look like assholes in the future. But what I want to talk about is this question. James, this is perfect, man. Actually, I was going to ask everyone this. I had to quickly change my question to everybody. But this is kind of what I want to talk about, mainly because I just recently finished a design memoir called Two-Dimensional Man, printed by Abrams. And this is the cover and back cover, sort of collapsing on itself. I've gotten a lot of questions. I think the one I've gotten most is, were you compelled to do this? Or well, let's say that's second. First is, what's the book about? Shit. You'd think I would know, but I always come up blank. But I guess the book is about how somebody, in this case me, can become interested in and commit to a life as a graphic designer. You know, I'm interested in semiotics and color and typographic form and composition. And why would, you know, to the outside world looking in, it's a little perplexing why someone would be into something like that. So it's about that, but I think it's also an attempt to answer this question for me, why? And I don't know if I really came up with any answers, but I probably came up with better answers than this. Jamie is clearly a wise ass. So it's, you know, oh, sorry. It's not about the money. You're not going to get rich, at least I haven't. And I'm just going to say this thing here, admit it. This has not been a focus for me. I'm sorry to say. I have sort of a pessimistic view of designers. I think designers are sort of responsible for fucking everything up. And all that's going to happen is it's going to get more fucked up. There's unintended consequences of everything. And sometimes I feel the bigger you think, the worse the fuck up is going to be. So look, I've checked out. I got a small office on 6th Avenue and 14th Street. I want to be a good global citizen. I want to be honest. I don't want to take too much and keep my footprint small, and I'm afraid that's going to have to be good enough right now. I think I started, you know, career as a graphic designer thinking that was possible, but I just have come to the realization that that's not what I've been focusing on. Anyway, getting back to why be a designer, I think, you know, your upbringing, of course, is incredibly important to it. This is the Sahre family circa 1970. My dad was an aerospace engineer. My mom was an occupational therapist. There was no art or design in our family at all. I'm number 3 there. My older brother, Greg, number 1, still lives with my mom in upstate New York. He's deaf and he has a learning disability. He's a great bowler, and he loves making things. I'm going to talk about Greg in a second. Then next is my sister Sharon, my older sister. Sharon is married to a golf pro and lives outside Rochester, New York, and votes Republican. She's the normal one, okay? And then last but not least is my brother Kenny, or Angus. He changed his name to Angus when he dropped out of high school and joined the circus. Angus Young from AC/DC, that's who he named himself after. I'm going to talk about him again. We grew up here, cookie-cutter suburb, all the lawns the same, all the aluminum siding the same. Ate a lot of meatloaf and white bread. You know, I mainly grew up with my younger brother, Angus, now we'll call him. He was a couple years younger than me, and we did everything together. We played sports together. We listened to the same shitty music together. We played the same shitty video games. And we shared a room. We had bunk beds. And we'd wake each other up at 1 o'clock in the morning to catch Mr. Bill on Saturday Night Live. And then I graduated high school, and I went to design school in Ohio. Far enough that my parents couldn't drive in unexpectedly, but not too far. Kent State University. My brother, and became a different person, basically. We started moving black squares around. Why? I didn't know. But learned to be a designer through undergrad and grad. And really at the end felt like a very different person. Meanwhile, Angus, as I said, joined the circus. He worked for years with camels and then elephants. Most of it involved cleaning up after them. He called them his girls. He went to the circus. And then so the way I look at it, he sort of stayed the same person, except a more fucked up version of the same person. Add like alcoholism and drugs and stuff and living on a train. He smelled really badly. Like Angus was around animals all the time. He could take 1,000 showers and he still smelled like a barn. Anyway, we would get back together. Now I'm a fancy designer. I have a graduate degree. And there was always conflict. We came from the same place and had the same upbringing, but it was different. And so usually we got together maybe 2 or 3 times a year. The circus was literally in town. He'd be in New York with the circus, and he'd live with me for a while. And this just happened. We'd get together, hey, hug, whatever, fight, break up, then we'd get back together. And just over the years, maybe 20 years, this would happen. So I want to tell you a quick little story. One time that he came, I don't know, he had just bought a camcorder. And so I don't know what year that would have been. But I was working at the time, he was at my studio, and he was videotaping me working. Has anyone seen themselves working? Anybody? It's fucking disturbing. Don't do it. Do not do it. He sat me down laughing and made me watch myself. You're a zombie. You're just sitting there for hours, not moving, staring at a screen. I don't know what I thought I was doing, but it wasn't that. And here's a guy who shovels shit for a living laughing at my life choices. Okay? So that gets you thinking. And this gets right to stuff we're already talking about, or other people are talking about, but it made me think, Raj is like, man, you're really going down a depressing mode here. People are going to leave here and join the priesthood, give up design totally. I've stared at a lot of screens over the years. I stared at that. I stared at that. This, stared at this, stared at that, stared at that, stared at that, stared at that, stared at these, stared at that, and now I'm staring at this. And this is out of date. How am I changing the world? I'm still using CS4. People are like, wow, where'd you get this antique? I use these things until they die. Horrible deaths. I don't update. So excuse anyone my age. I don't care about the update. I don't care. You'll get there. Another little story, this is aside, I'm getting away from the family for a second. 1991, I was in the audience at one of these things, and a photographer named Jamie Odgers was on the stage. And he told the story I want to relay to you just because it fits into my larger question of why and motivations of why we make things, why we're creative. If you know his work, it's probably because of a collaboration he did with April Greiman in the 80s. They did a lot of work together. This is a poster they designed together. But he's a designer, he's an artist. He lives in LA, and the story, I'm going to butcher this, but the story he told has always stayed with me. And it goes like this. He was taking the garbage out, it was at night. He didn't duck, and he hit his head on a palm tree, low-hanging branch, blood. Pain, you know, panic, like, I gotta get to the emergency room. I'm bleeding. Anybody who's had even a small cut on your head, it bleeds, right? So he's in the house trying to decide whether he's going to call an ambulance or drive in himself, and he thought for a second, you know, I've always wanted to make something with my own blood. And he goes get drawing paper, and he's got blood. And he said, like, was always sort of squeamish and chicken about actually, like, procuring it myself, like cut himself, or I guess you could get your blood extracted, whatever. And now here was blood. So he starts making. Time passes. As I said, he's a photographer. He set up his camera. He started taking self-portraits. He did a whole bunch of other things. And he said he didn't know how much time passed, but at a certain point he's like, oh shit, I'm bleeding. Pain came back, and he got himself to the hospital and had like, 10 or 15 stitches, whatever it was. But the thing I wanted to share with you was his takeaway from that. And it was this, that he realized that what he called himself didn't matter. It was how the feeling he had when he worked was the most important thing. And that he was going to commit himself, therefore, to be in the zone that he was in when he was making this work. And that zone, we all know what it is. When you're sitting there for 6 hours without a break, no pain, no hunger, you're not sleepy, you're focused on making this thing, whatever it is. And that's from the moment he got up in the morning to the moment he went to bed, he wanted to be in that zone as much as possible. Now, I don't know how this worked out for him. I haven't talked to him in years. But it's always stayed with me as maybe an extreme example, but sort of beautiful in its way in terms of like how creating and making things can, I don't know, help, help you get through things. I mean, it's happened with me many, many times. Divorces, death, I mean, really heavy stuff. So anyway, back to the family. And Greg, number one there, again, I mentioned he's deaf. He lives with my mom upstate in a basement bedroom. This is his bedroom. Greg he puts stuff on his wall, he just never takes it down. So there's like stuff here from 1973, it's just layered. As I mentioned, Greg's a great bowler, but he was also my example of a graphic designer in the family before there was a graphic designer. I found this, he did this in 1976, so he's probably 12. He designed all the logos from his bowling league. I'm watching him do this, I especially like that one. He makes all kinds of stuff. He's a maker. And the stuff he makes is for himself or for maybe a gift for somebody, right, in his basement. So he made this bowling lamp. He made this as a gift for my wife, Emily, made out of tongue depressors and little soda pop things. When my family travels up, I got 2 boys, we travel up to Binghamton to visit, and he does elaborate chalk drawings, on the sidewalk. Recently, he mowed Harry and Eli's, my 2 sons' names into the front yard of the house in Comic Sans, I think. I mean, it's epic. And if you're wondering, he does work digitally, but he's rocking Microsoft Windows 95 on a same era IBM ThinkPad. Fuck you, Apple. You gotta respect that. Anyway, his main thing though is tissue cozies, tissue box cozies is what he makes. I don't know if they have this here, but it's like plastic vinyl grids, and you can needle point the yarn in and make designs on it and everything. But the cool thing is you can make them 3-dimensional. you know, so it slips over a tissue box. He made this one for me. I had in my studio for years, people would see it and go, oh, where'd you get that? My brother made it. Can you make one for me? No. I asked him many times. I even offered him money. Nope. It's got to move him, you know. This is another one that really impacted me. This is the sign language for "I love you." So Greg did this thing and put a rainbow in it, and this is kind of a redundant heart there. And I just saw this and was like, "Oh my God, that's amazing! It looks like a symbol for a gay deaf cult." This was not Greg's intent. I just want to say. Rainbows have a very different meaning in Binghamton than they do in the West Village. Anyway, he makes these things, he customizes it, they're all different, right? So without telling him, I was like, you know, this is super fascinating. Like, here's Greg making permanent things in his basement for one person or maybe nobody, and it's sort of the opposite of what I do. I make things that are temporary, and a lot of people see them, right? And so I was like, I want to see, but I still felt, and I was kind of questioning, obviously, my reaction to it. So I'm like, let's put this out in the world and see if I can get this thing to spread, you know? So I redesigned it, again, without him knowing. He called it Spreading the Love. This was a MySpace project. This was years ago. And it basically was a platform to disseminate the logo, right? So if you, and I self-financed it. We made buttons. We made vinyl stickers, and so anybody who requested, I sent them stickers, and then they put it in a database. They'd photograph it somewhere, and it was spreading. It was great. I also provided an editable PDF in it, so you were, you know, like make your own, right? A lot of people did. So at one point at Christmas or something, or holidays, I showed him what this was, and he was just like, did not understand why I was doing this. He was sort of like, there, you know. But I also asked him at the same time, why do you make everything? Why do you make this stuff? Like, what's like? And he's equally confused by that question. But I did get this out of him. It has to get done, which I love. Like, Greg doesn't have deadlines. It's an impulse. It's urgent for him. It's internal. I think it's amazing. I think it's just amazing. So no more questions for Greg. So the last bit of work I want to share with you is my ongoing collaboration with the band They Might Be Giants. Anybody know They Might Be Giants here? All right. All right. We're going to work on that, guys. Anyway, this is John Flansburgh and John Linnell and their hats, probably circa 1985. They started their career in Brooklyn as an accordion contrarians. An accordion, a guitar, and a drum machine. You just have to listen to the music, hard to describe. But they've been making music ever since. My introduction to them was a super cool upperclassman while I was at Kent State literally handed me a little folded piece of paper, and it had this phone number on it. So they used to take ads out in the Village Voice and just, right above strippers, gorillas, and balloons, and they just put a different song on their answering machine at their apartment. And this got them their first record contract. So, in the early 80s. But they had no releases. There was no way to listen to their music in Ohio. So I just called this number like 4 times a day, every day. Murky, weird, just like, I loved it. I loved it. So this was not long after that, their first release came out. This was affectionately known as the Pink Album. So I'm at school learning to be a graphic designer while all these albums start coming out. Great design, really catchy, weird, smart, funny is the way I would describe them. And we're probably getting into the late 90s now with the album art. Over the years, they've worked with some great designers. Now, I'm just listening to this stuff, not designing for them. And right about here, they lost me. I didn't have kids at the time, and they started doing children's music, really good children's music, but children's music. And I was just like, what the hell are they doing? It started getting really weird. There were puppets, dogs with suits. I was like, okay, so I moved on to Neutral Milk Hotel or whatever the hell I was listening to. and these albums kept coming out. So fast forward to 2011, I got an email from John Flansburgh out of the blue. He had seen some work I had done for the New York Times and wanted to see if I wanted to work with them on their next release. And this was an adult record. They were getting back to adult music. This album had a death theme. So this is the album that I designed that eventually became Join Us. And if you're curious, the way I work is directly with one of the John Flansburgh, who's a designer as well, really. And this is how it works. I'll send him something, and then he'll say, I love it, but we're not a Helvetica band. And I explained to him, no, John, the monster truck hearse is crushing Helvetica. It's an anti-modernist statement. And he's like, oh, great, let's do it. Back cover. And they've always done vinyl, so I got to start designing vinyl records, which was cool. I did a whole bunch of illustrations for the release in this sort of posterized style. And of course, it became a really unsatisfying postage stamp in the iTunes, which is gone now. But I didn't want we were sort of done, but I didn't want the project to end, right? So I'm like, what else can we do? And since they're an indie band, it's like, I don't know, what do you want to do? So I'm like, well, when you get the digital download, you get a PDF. So why don't we do something with a PDF? No other plan than that. And so I'm like, well, we'll give instructions. Your fans are crafty, to make the monster truck hearse, right? You print it out 100% on your printer at the office and build this thing. So we did it, but at the last minute, I was like, it's not funny. So I just was like, let's change the title to Make Your Own Life-Size Monster Truck Hearse. And it's a joke because the only instructions I changed were, instead of print this PDF out at 100%, I said print this PDF out at 3,400%. I had my assistant out measuring a station wagon, and we used a proportion wheel to come up with size. All right? So we didn't know how to do this, we just did it. So that was the end, right? But then the more I thought about it, I was like, shit, we got to make this. So this is a 12-foot monster truck hearse made of cardboard and Epson prints and some wheat paste. And it led to our first music video for the band.
I'm so tired of your lies and the evil things you're doing behind my back. Are the crimes that you have never committed? I doubt it sometimes. I wonder, when will you die? You're insane. You are bad. You wreck everything you touch, and you're a sociopath. There's just one thing that everyone's wondering: when will you die? School children stay at home, and all the banks will close. Each year will mark
6 months worth of work for one take, one moment. Anyway, so this led to all kinds of other stuff, so I'm going to click through these fairly quickly. I've since been designing releases for them, which has been great. They still do CDs too, which is weird, but awesome because I get to design them. It's got on stage too. It started with kick drums. That's Marty Beller. And stage videos. And I designed They Might Be Giants' first app, which for those of you not familiar with, it's free, and you can get rid of all your other apps. You don't need them, because this plays 5 rotating They Might Be Giants songs. We had a Japanese artist, Hine, design the felt cassette, so it's all like buttons, you know, buttons.
Hive mind. Hive mind. Decision makers deciding for me. Decision makers decide.
There, near the borderline, right between two countries. There, near the borderline, right between two countries.
So real quickly, I'll just show you this last project. We did it all with 8mm film. You can get this is the Bell Zoom-matic camera. It was the same camera used by Abraham Zapruder to shoot the Kennedy assassination, photograph the Kennedy assassination. And we did everything with black and white film, and it became. They gave me the best song on nanobots. It's a biography song about the inventor Nikola Tesla. And I had so many ideas that I had to actually convince the band to do 9 different remixes of the song for each of the videos. So you can find this online. I just want to show you. We did a Tesla impersonator who was kind of an asshole skater. We electrocuted a teddy bear. We outfitted a portrait of Tesla with light bulbs and operated it to the song, which takes some practice. There's a karaoke version, and there's a cat video. And you can click on each one there. I'm just going to show you a little piece of all of them at once. We just recently reinstated Dial-A-Song. It's a video a week now. That's the identity for it, more cowbell. And that found its way on stage as well. This is something I just included because we just are finishing it now. It's a picture disc re-release of Flood. And totally had to find it. You know, when it's on the thing, it animates. It's kind of cool. We had to figure that out. And this is the last thing. This is the last release that I designed for them. The album was originally called My Murdered Remains, so you can kind of maybe see it's a sort of murdered type here. But finished, everybody loved it. Then something happened in the States. There was another shooting, I think, in Nevada, and they called me back and said, listen, we're changing the name of the album. You know what they went to? From My Murdered Remains? I Like Fun. So we had a discussion, should we redo the artwork? And it was kind of like, no, let's just let it ride, you know? I have no idea what this means. I mean, it was fun for me, but other than that, I don't know. So anyway, I want to leave you with this. You know, I think as designers, we tend to forget that we're in very controlled sort of environments when we're using any program. And I just want to leave, I don't care how you make what you make. Obviously, we've seen people just using technology, and it's amazing, and people do more analog thing. I personally have always had the viewpoint of the technology is there for my purposes, and I'm not there to serve the technology. That's an obvious thing to say, but I think sometimes we forget that. Adobe certainly has. And I broke out, I don't do this all the time, but I had to break out some of my old tools, the T-square and everything else. So this is what I want. If you find yourself in a program and you just need a breath of fresh air, go figure out, there's all kinds of ways of making things you don't have to use in the computer. You're very constricted. Think about it this way. When I started my career, all of it was tools and artboards and tape, and all it was to line shit up. That's all it was. It was just a big struggle to line things up. Now think about it. We got the opposite problem. Everything's lined up. It's actually hard work to fuck things up again. So just remember you're in a controlled environment, and there's no better example of that. During this process of making this, I lost Marty Beller, the drummer. I lost his name. I had cut it out, and I'm looking everywhere for it. I looked for like a half an hour, and I'm finally like, oh, shit, I'm going to have to print this out, cut it out again, glue it, find whatever. You know where it was? I finally found it. It was on the cat. So the next time you're relying on that program, think of Cooper. Whoop. We're skipping over this. Okay, so I'm done. Last thing I want to say, to my larger answers, what I've concluded, from writing a memoir to working with bands like They Might Be Giants, they've been doing what they do for 33 years. They do it their way. It's not they don't care what other people think, but they have to do this. They don't have a choice, and it's beautiful. It's great to work with people like this. So why am I a designer? Some of this is going to be super obvious. Graphic design provides me with purpose to my life. I get up every morning and ask what I get to design today. It's as simple as that. It provides my life with meaning. I'm a graphic designer when I'm walking down the street, or when I'm watching a movie, when I'm eating a meal, probably when I'm sleeping and having sex. It's not a job. It's who you are. And I really do think it's survival. Not only do you can make a living with it, but also I think it's like breathing. I think you can have control over it at certain times, but a lot of times it's just automatic. And again, is it even a choice? Thank you.